Welcome back to Simon and Whiten, a podcast at the crossroads of media, business, and politics. I'm Christian Whiten, joined as always by Mark Simon. Mark, please say hello.
Hey, everybody, how are you?
All right, Mark. Just news out recently. We've spoken before about the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. If you don't have an actual plan to increase trade or to basically open the way for capitalism to work in free market economies in the Pacific in order to compete with China, well, then what do? You have a conference and you put out a bunch of statements and you talk about information sharing. Voila, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. This is Biden's Seinfeld trade agreement, this trade agreement about nothing. So it turns out India isn't even willing now to send their diplomats, of which they have a lot, to just fill seats and go along and sort of say happy things about this framework that everyone sort of knows is about nothing. Incidentally, Taiwan really wants to get into this framework because they want to get into everything. Most of our other Asian allies have signed up, but India basically calling us out and saying this is just not anything to it, certainly not anything that serves our economic benefit or security benefit. So thanks, but no thanks. You can go and have your conferences by yourself. Do you think this is a big deal?
I think it's the end of a road. And what I mean by that is I think for a long time, Britain and the US and the West has been able to say, please come to us. And there was this entire generation in India, Japan, Asia, and even sub-Saharan Africa, where they'd probably say, oh, yes, well, the smart people want us to come, and that's it. And I think what's happened is we've had enough Indians, Chinese, and everybody else go through our Ivy League education system to know that these guys are a bunch of dweebs. You know what I'm saying? In other words, they're looking around and they're just not that impressed because they were at Harvard, they were at Yale, they were at Stanford, they were at whatever it is, school it was, and they see that these people aren't that impressive. I know that sounds really simple, but the point I'm getting to is I'm not going to credit Donald Trump with it. But what I'm saying is that a lot of times we've had a populist awareness, and populism is sometimes misunderstood in my mind, that people think it's always about some guy driving up and down the road with a pickup truck. No, populism, a lot of it is very smart people who are not in the political system, who do not stay around all night long watching C-SPAN or calling each other to say brilliant article in the Atlantic Monthly. Just normal smart people are deciding that they are going to be involved in politics that affect them. They're no longer willing to take it from other people and just say, okay, we'll follow the ruffians here. Or and I mean by ruffians, just the intellectuals who try to push us through and push over people. The Indians are absolutely right. This is meaningless. I looked at this thing the other day and I was like, what is this? I mean, there's no deals. There's nothing there. And the problem is the U.S., especially the Biden administration, essentially they've got such a domestic constituency that's in their supporters, they can't do anything. Anytime they do something, they've got to check climate change, has to be checked. The climate people do not want any economic growth. They don't like it. When you talk to them and you get it down there, economic growth is bad. Everybody needs to be in a wagon, pulled by a horse, and they're happy about that. And then after that, you've got the labor people. Well, the labor people don't want anything to happen. So essentially, you're raising cost, you're raising regulations to keep certain people happy. So what happens? In other words, you've got nothing to offer, okay? And then you've got a protectionist wave in the U.S. that's unfortunately there, and it's in both parties. So you don't have anything to offer. In the old days, we could go to places and say, we'll give you access to the U.S. market. Then the West can say, we'll give you access to all our markets. The Indians and everybody else, like the Chinese and everybody going, well, we've got access to the markets we need. We have what we can get. I mean, Taiwan, actually, that you bring it up is actually hilarious because Taiwan's looking to do a free trade agreement. And every time I look at a free trade agreement, I was just with a former head of AIT for lunch, and he made a great point. He said, they've got everything. What else do they need? What else does Taiwan have? They have all the most beneficial treatments of any nation, we've given to them. And their only problem is basically they have a banking empire from the Ottoman Empire. They have a legal system. They have a legal system that's finger in the wind, so it's worthless in that sense. So all their problems are theirs. I mean, I worked on a Taiwan free trade agreement years and years ago, 2003, and I think again in 2011 or 12. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't happen because the Taiwanese don't want it to happen. But we don't have really anything to offer them, and they know that. That's the funniest thing about it. It's like, is there any constituency in Taiwan that has anything they want in the U.S. other than the DPP and the politicians who want to be able to attend a meeting? I have no idea. So, yes, long-winded way of saying there's nothing there for India to get. And Modi is a pretty serious guy in that sense. And he's like, look, unless there's something there, I'm not going for it. And I don't think there's a lot that India can get out of this either.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. It's a couple things absolutely true. You know, the idea of a free trade agreement with Taiwan was a brand new idea. I think in the 1970s, Heritage came up with it. Still dusts it off. I'm sure they still fundraise on it, but as you point out, there have been multiple times where it's been brought up and just doesn't go anywhere because you're right, it doesn't really solve anything big for anyone. That's why I think rather than trying to have a big free trade agreement or some pseudo whatever IPEF would be, create a forum that gives politicians the cover and some impetus. So it's not forcing anything, but give cover to politicians if they want to undertake capitalist market reforms. So if the Taiwanese want to say, what do you need for a bank account? Really, you just need to verify the owner's identity and have mechanisms in place to detect, massive money laundering. That's all you need. So, if you can walk into our branch with an ID or a passport and it's you, then yeah, you can have a bank account. Well, the reality is a lot different. And that, goes across the whole financial system in Taiwan, not just bank accounts, but insurance, credit ratings, why they can't use credit ratings from the US and we don't have an agreement there. That's a little bit mystifying. And with India, it seems like we're at this point, kind of, from 1991 until I don't know what the end point is, where you're right, America could sort of just set the agenda. Everyone saw us as the winner. Everyone wanted to get in, were willing to undertake reforms or do whatever. And that era is just over. And you see this with India and others going their own way on sanctions against Russia, saying, again, we're not going to pretend that we can put a cap on Russian gas or oil. We're just going to buy it at, what the market rate currently is, which is discount to other stuff. And, we're going to have our own thing.
I mean, one time, if somebody, it was like the emperor has no clothes. I remember I was this guy from Mexico, very bright young man. I wouldn't want to mention his name and hurt him. But the thing is that he was like, if anybody wanted anything, he said we should have a trade group with Central America. That's our labor and that's some of our things. Central America, Mexico, the U.S., and Canada. He said, but then every time we get together with something like that, it looks like we could just trade among ourselves and be fine. In other words, he said, so it's not like we have a lot that we're looking for a lot of things. I mean, the American Trucking Association doesn't really care what happens in free trade agreements because, they've got a shortage of drivers and magically they have a tremendous number of, loads coming in and they can't handle everything already. So I don't know. I mean, I really think there's a huge disconnect and I kind of like it. There's a huge disconnect in Washington, Brussels, London, Paris, where they think they can get these people from developing countries in the room again and drive hard bargains and, basically tell people you just have to be there. But the days of Gloria Aurora, the former president of the Philippines, we were having dinner one time. She's a very nice lady to talk to, actually. Although she wrote her doctoral dissertation at or her master's thesis, either I can't remember which one. She wrote it on like the benefits of communism when she was at Georgetown. It's like she wants no one to see that thing ever. She actually jokes about it. She goes, I was young too. And but she said a lot of times, you would get the Philippines, you'd get Indonesia, you'd get Thailand, because all these people wanted to be part of these Western organizations. Everybody was kind of like Taiwan. They wanted to be a member. So you could get them to join APEC, you could get them to do things, and then they would use those international agreements to drive domestic reforms. Well, now they're driving domestic reforms on their own because they know the ideas, they know what's happening. I mean, you can go to almost any country in Southeast Asia and have a pretty good discussion about, the benefits of Hayek or something like that. Now, they all don't put it in those terms, but we'll have to see. But I think really what amazes me, and I'm not trying to be partisan here or too partisan, but here we again, once again, our elites, the really smart people, tell us something and they can't, it doesn't go. And the other thing too, I'll add one final point. I have to say that anytime you start talking climate change with people from India, China, or Southeast Asia, all they hear is you're restricting us. That's all they hear. They don't, I mean, they don't hear anything else. And they just hear people basically, oh, you've got to restrict your gases, no coal plants. And they're like, look, what are we supposed to do for power? So it's it's very, very disheartening that this is the best the U.S. can come up with. And you're right. China just looks at it and says, not a threat.
Right. Right. Well, I do wonder too. You mentioned the sun god worship, climate change alarmism, the enthusiasm for that that's infecting the West. And they're just not buying it in the Middle East. They're not buying it in India. Even some other places will pay a teeny bit of lip service. Modi might receive
Yeah,
John
California
Kerry.
won't be buying it much longer either once they have all these blackouts. Pretty soon, let me tell you something. When the kids can't recharge their iPhones for their TikTok videos, there could be riots in the street. That's when they're going to get upset.
Well, I was in grad school in California when the lights went out. I knew something was wrong. I was jogging on the beach in Santa Monica. It was a time of day that there shouldn't have been a traffic jam, and there was one because the traffic lights were out. And that's what it took to elect a Republican in California. It was Arnold Schwarzenegger, but it took a pretty serious crisis and a recall. So, of all the bad things that have happened in California and the exodus of people, that hasn't triggered political revolution. Who
Yeah,
knows? Maybe that will.
I just think like we're talking about this Indo-Pacific agreement. This is made by people who have no connection with the real world. And
Mm-hmm.
therefore people who operate in the real world, i.e. the populist who have seen a route to electoral victory, thanks to, I hate to say it, Trump, and the rhetoric and how he moves around in the how he taught people to move around in the political circles. They figured it out, and they don't really, there's no rewards for joining no one goes, wow, we joined the Indo-Pacific. I'm going to vote for Bob because of that. Nobody, they don't care. It doesn't mean anything.
Right. The odd man out in the Pacific now is Japan in some ways, and they value their membership in the G7. You see them talk about that certainly more than APEC or the G20 or other things. And okay, they're the only Asian nation in the thing. Incidentally, the G7 grew out of the 70s. That's why countries like Italy, which aren't that important, but were, I guess, a little bit important at the time. The idea was you get together capitalist countries that actually had resources that could get things done. And it came out of the collapse of Bretton Woods and the economic chaos of the 70s. So anyway, but Japan today, they are refusing to raise interest rates. They do have inflation. It's not as bad as us, but because rates are up here and finally in Europe, not in Japan, you have the dollar trading above 140 yen to the dollar. It should be, the norm is 115. Yeah. It's nuts. It may be short-lived. I wish if they would let you go to Japan without jumping through 18 hoops for COVID, even though COVID is widespread. I would go buy a bunch of yen right now, but not going to happen, I guess. What do you think? Do you think this will have a political impact?
Yes, it always does. I mean, sooner or later it will. The problem is the other guys don't have any solutions. Japan problems is declining demographics, aging population, and with a weak yen, an inability to really invest abroad in a competitive manner. In my mind, I mean, I think that's a big, big deal. That basically, if you have a strong yen, you go abroad. If you have a weak yen, you don't go abroad as much or with as much force. I'm sure people will find fault with that, but I think it's true. And I believe that basically Japan is coming to this. It's really going to be the first demographic uh, country. China may be ahead of them a little bit because we just don't know the true numbers there. But you know, Japan's problem, Christian, is I don't know if they have a way out. I mean, what's their way out? It's declining every year. Every year there's 1 million less Japanese. Every year 2 million more Japanese move into, once you hit 65, I'm sorry to tell you, and that's hopefully close to a decade for me. But then once you hit 65, you're not going out and working anymore in all types of jobs. And so what's happening is that they've got a huge labor problem. They're in fairness to them, they're being fairly aggressive about bringing people in, but still that's a high cost in what they're doing and how they bring people in. I don't see a way out for them. I mean, I think they could end up being, basically the head office that has all their assets overseas, and they manage them. But I'm not seeing any ability. We would talk about raising interest rates. All right, they raise interest rates, but does that change the underlying economic story of Japan? And I don't think it does. I think they have real problems. Somebody said to me one time, I thought it was really interesting. They said, "Oh, we just need to get the tourists back to Kyoto." And the guy goes, "Why? We don't need them. We're already, with all the Japanese coming to Kyoto, we've got full employment here. So what are we going to do if we have another 2 million Chinese a year come up? We're going to have to hire Chinese to come in, And then the Japanese are suffering something that I think we talked about last week with real estate. I think for the average person, when your real estate holdings really start declining, I think that really means a lot. In other words, I think people will put up with a lot if they're getting richer every couple of years. You know what I'm saying? But if you're seeing this whole negative equity thing, and I've seen it in Asia a couple of times, and the reaction is pretty fierce politically. And I think it's going to start being, apparently, Japan, Tokyo, excuse me, and the major areas are not yet suffering as bad as the outer areas. But, you go 200 miles, 100 miles outside of Tokyo, and, they don't even put up for sale signs anymore. Everybody just assumes it's for sale if somebody wants to buy it.
Wow, that's depressing.
No, I was talking to a guy who's in the agriculture up there, and he said, there are hundreds around him, he said, of small, medium farms that, he said, they're just going to be basically just growing weeds, 20 years, 15 years from now, because the farmers are all in their 50s and 60s, and nobody's showing up to buy them. He said, unless they're all Filipinos and Chinese and Indonesians, which that's fine.
Right. Yeah, I remember Abe demonstrating one time. This is the former prime minister recently assassinated, but when he was prime minister, it was a machine. It looked like a Zamboni. I don't know if it was planting the rice or cultivating the rice, but of course, rice being grown underwater tends to be very human labor intensive, and this was the solution for a nation of old farts.
It's very interesting. I mean, Kobe beef, for example, and Wagyu, and the beef's up there. I was reading a story about 6-7 months ago that essentially people are worried it's not the same quality because they don't have the number of hands to put on the beef. They don't have the number of people they need to raise the beef. So they're changing their systems. I don't know. Maybe they have little robots that that go like that. I haven't seen that yet. God knows they'll have it. You know what I'm saying? But
all right. Well, if this doesn't work out, I'm going to go be a tulip farmer in Hokkaido. I heard that's actually
it's true. But I do think I don't see how we get out of it. It's kind of like Europe. We were talking earlier. I mean, I just looked at my iPhone and I go, well, what's the euro doing today? It's 1-to-1.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm like, honey, let's get on the plane. Let's go. You know what I'm saying? This is the chance. And I said to you earlier, I said, well, probably won't ever be this cheap again. And then I thought to myself, do we really think Europe's going to pull themselves out of this? I don't think so. How hard is it? And as long as America is the aircraft carrier, we're going to keep people are going to keep putting money in here. And with our system that's so unique, the federal system is just such a wonder. In other words, everybody's competing with everybody. And that's an amazing thing. It's hard to explain to people in other places that Australia, a little bit, provinces are a little bit different, but Canada a little bit too. But for the rest of the world, basically, doesn't matter if you're in Shanghai or Shenzhen, it's the same policy you're dealing with for the most part. And the U.S. is different. If you pick Texas, if you pick Alabama, if you pick Florida, boy, it's a completely different experience than like Rhode Island. You know what I'm saying? It's amazing.
Yeah. I lived in Rogues Island for 3 years. Interesting place. Let me throw you a curveball. We didn't discuss this before, but let's go across south and across the Taiwan Strait. This is in abstract. We've discussed this before, which is defending Taiwan. I've been one of the people who have assumed this is a big shift for the U.S., that we need to get away from cowboys and Indians, and that fighting in the Pacific, with the geographies there and the fact that there is water, means that you invest in big systems more, ships, especially submarines, missiles, satellites, nuclear systems. In that having a big army and having a counterinsurgency capability is less important. But just talking to a friend who pushed back a little and said, well, first of all, whether you're doing actual fighting or just trying to prepare and therefore deter China from invading Taiwan, special forces in the infantry, but special forces is very important to the, creating at least the potential for guerrilla warfare. But more importantly, he said, is that you don't want to just throw away the capabilities you have in special forces, broadly defined. That, we have an infantry and it's very important and we garrison Europe and all of that, but that's very different. That's managing masses of people, many of whom will be in the military for 2 or 4 years and then get on with the career, young guys, age 18, something like that. That the real warriors are actually the people who are our Spartans, the people who, are the sergeants and staff sergeants, and who are in their high 20s, low 30s, who really, really mastered the art of being a soldier and of training others. Are found in the Army, in special forces, and that is critically important to Asia. So I don't know, just curious what you thought about that.
Well, I'll tell you this. My funny story for that is there's a place called the Diner, and you've been there probably. They serve these really great American breakfast, and the burgers are pretty good too. So I always go down there on Saturdays and Sundays. That's my morning. See, when I'm in my bachelorhood there, I show up there for my morning French toast, and that, when I'm reading and sitting there and enjoying my 3rd or 4th cup of coffee. And I was sitting there many months ago, and across from me were these guys with a little bit of beard, the Carteret hats, all these things sitting here. And, I was sitting there, and I had a charger with me, a phone charger with me, and the guys are looking around. I said, "You want to borrow my charger?" "No problem, guys." He asked the waitress for a charger. She said, "We don't have one." I said, "I got one, guys. I'm just starting breakfast. I'm fully charged." And I said, "Oh, thank you, sir." "Yes, sir." "No, sir." So
there's the tell. There's the tell. Politeness.
From America, millennial says to me, "No, sir." "Yes, sir." "Yes, sir." "No, sir." I was looking at them, and you could pick these guys out a mile away. And, one of the guys said, "Oh, are you here on business, sir?" And I said, "Are you here on business, sir?" I still remember that. And I said, "Oh, no, I kind of live here." I said, "I go back and forth, and I'm a Virginian trapped in New Jersey." And we had a nice exchange. I didn't press him on anything like that. But there have been, quote unquote, rumors, really confirmed, that, anywhere between 40 and 60 Marines or special forces or recon rangers, I don't know what the hell they are, they're over there training the Taiwanese. Here's the point I would make. I think that's great. I think they're doing a good job training the Taiwanese. To me, if they can get a couple of thousand Taiwanese every couple of months ready and make them better. The problem is they don't stay in the military very long, but the reserves and things like that stay up. I think they're waking them up, the Taiwanese up. I think these guys are very, very important. I also think they're what I would call low political impact. You could put a couple of hundred of these guys around there, you know what I'm saying? And they could train people, they could work with people. We forget, we've probably got over 1,000 technicians taking care of all that U.S. military equipment there. I've met a bunch of guys. They're down at the military bases. They're the retired Air Force guys who worked on F-16s, and then they go over there on a contract with whoever it is and maintain the F-16s. They teach them the electronics. They do everything. So we've got those contractors. That's a regular part of our setup. You bump into them in Saudi Arabia. You bump into them in Japan. They're around. Here's the problem. The problem is that really right now the Taiwanese are not ready to really take that training on seriously. And another thing, there was a I would call it a propaganda picture, and it was like Taiwan ready to defend itself, and it showed the Taiwanese out on the rocks. Taiwan will defend itself against everything. And like there's two guys with rifles and there's two guys with 9mm pistols pointing their pistols on the rocks out into the ocean. And I'm going like, what did you send Barney Fife down there to stop a PLA invasion? I mean, that's the mentality. That's the problem. They don't have war fighters. They have never been in a war. There's nobody alive in Taiwan, who is not in a wheelchair, or, eating whole food now, who's been in a war. Right. And they haven't been there. Maybe Korea a little bit. Some of them, you might find some old guys from there. And of course, they went to Vietnam on a regular basis, but those are few and far between. The real issue is, and the real thing that we have to work on with all of this is we have to get the Taiwanese. I believe the Taiwanese will fight. I believe these special forces guys will show them how to fight. I believe the next part of that and what worries the Chinese, the thing about Ukraine that we often forget, it wasn't the Ukrainian military that rose up and has been giving the Russians such a hard time. It's this guys who fought in Chechnya, guys who fought in Afghanistan. Then they've got a bunch of 35, 45, 50-year-old soldiers out there who have combat experience and are willing to fight. But what they had to do was they had to bring them back out of civilian life to fight. And I think the problem with the Taiwanese is that I haven't seen that transition yet. There's a guy over there named Enoch Yu. I think he does a reasonable job. He's always talking about civil defense. He's talking about putting Band-Aids on people. That's great. What they need to do, I think Lindsey Graham said something like this, is basically we need to sell them 40,000 M16s, distribute them throughout the island, and let the Chinese know if you come ashore, there's going to be at least 1 out of 4 of these guys who knows what he's doing. So you're going to be fighting 10,000 guerrilla soldiers, And I believe you have to make yourself tougher than you want to be. I do not like the talk from the Biden administration and from any administration. Trump had some of it too. We will resupply you. We will give you supplies. Taiwan's not Ukraine. It's not going to fall back into Poland and then strike out again. Once they take Taiwan, it's over. So
yeah, a long way that would require the cooperation probably of the Filipinos to
resupply and to do everything. So I myself, Kristen, I have real heartache about, I think all the pieces are moving in there. I think the Chinese know that as well. The benefit that we have is I really do believe the Chinese military is probably on par with the Russian military, if not worse, but with no fighting experience. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure what happened. Again, this AIT guy I bumped into, he said people are a little bit amazed at all these intimidation exercises. It doesn't look like the Chinese can do combined arms still. They're up on multiple different frequencies. But more importantly, they're showing capabilities all the time that Americans, even the Canadians, when it showed capabilities, they want the Americans to see what they could do fully. You know what I'm saying? And so I know it sounds odd, but I really am pessimistic that we can send all these special forces soldiers over there. I think we can do a great job training these people, but we have not seen the commitment from the Chai administration and other people to get things done. And I'm a little tired of hearing from the DPP people, well, we just can't get the military to go along. Sure you can. Just do it.
Yeah, just
do it. What are they going to do? Rise up and get upset about this? Most of the people you're training, because again, I'm a firm believer in what Jack Keane said. Some people said Taiwan could put 1.2 million people in the field. And Jack Keane said to these guys, he said, you don't want 1.2 million people in the field. They get in the way. If you could put 200, 250,000 in the field who know what the hell they're doing, it's a small island. That makes a really difficult island to take.
Yes, and has a lot of mountains in the middle. It's sort of perfect.
I as a guy said, you want to be Iwo Jima, you want to be Okinawa. Do you really think that in today's world, MacArthur took Iwo Jima, they took Okinawa, and we've justified it a million different ways. Think of all the bomber pilots that made it, you know what I'm saying, back because they could land at Iwo Jima. I know a lot. I'm not a revisionist or anything like that. But we made a decision. At that time, it was the best decision we had. But look at the loss of life that we had there with massive superior firepower and a Marine Corps, for the most part, an army that really wanted to fight. I'm not sure the Chinese are going to look at something like that and say, hey, I want a piece of that. you know.
Yeah, I agree entirely. And actually, just one in defense of MacArthur, that was actually Nimitz. That was the Central Pacific Campaign.
Yeah.
MacArthur came to a halt in the Philippines, and it was Nimitz and the Marines and the Navy team that wanted Okinawa and wanted
Oh,
Iwo. And yes, it was. It sort of raises the question that no one wanted. Even today, historians don't really want to talk about: is could you not have just left those behind or enveloped them? I guess if you're planning the invasion of Japan, the argument was, well, the Philippines,
yeah.
as your hinterland is too far behind, you needed stuff. But those were essentially
Yeah. I
frontal
mean,
assaults, especially frontal assaults on entrenched positions, whereas MacArthur was very keen on preserving life and on just enveloping and leaving behind strongholds.
no, you have to understand, my generation doesn't get to question the greatest generation and guys who are making those types of calls. I'm just saying that what you want to do is really make the Chinese think to themselves, do you think you could win in Iwo Jima? Could you think you could win in Okinawa? And
Uh-huh.
I do think the Taiwanese would be pretty fierce once it started. I think there's a character trait in the Taiwanese that is very, very tough, you know. And
Yeah.
I think in all people, you know, because they know it's over. They know that basically if the Chinese come ashore and they take it, they're done. So, you know, either you fight to the death or, you know, find that ticket on EVA Air for $25,000 for a economy class seat to LA.
Yeah, hopefully it doesn't come to that.
No,
Okay, well, yeah. And as far as whether the Chinese would fight, I just always think of Donald Sutherland's character in The Dirty Dozen, where he's pretending to be a general, he inspects the troops and goes, "Very pretty, Colonel, very pretty, but can they fight?"
I have to say, I really wonder. There was a guy in the Seventh Fleet, pretty senior, who said one time after a few pops, he said, "Look, I think what they're going to do is they're going to come out of Ningbo, they're going to come out of these places in their fancy new ships, and they're going to go out 12 miles, and they're going to turn left, or they're going to turn right, and cruise up and down the shore, because they're not going to want to have, you know, to face those cruise missiles that I think the U.S. will throw at them." In other words, because you know we always think that the Chinese, they're. Do we think they're just going to come out? They'll probably start softening up, and then all of a sudden,
Yeah.
you know, our SSGNs are sitting on the other side. There was a great line the other day. I can't remember who said it. There was a great line in the chat group I was on. And it was an ex-military guy, and he said, "Oh, great! They found out they can shoot. They shoot missiles over the islands. When they shot them over Taiwan, he goes, I wonder if they figured out that we can shoot them back." You know, in other words, like, no kidding,
Which
guys.
then brings to mind Doctor Strangelove, where the mad general is like, "Two can play at that game, soldier."
I mean, that's it's. They don't seem to think about that. It's an amazing thing. It's the one thing I will give our U.S. military all these years, and I hate. I mean, I like the term, you know, playing cow. We have men who know what it's like to put other men in battle. You know what I'm saying? And they're very serious about it. And, you know, the men and women that we have on these ships and everything like this, I think I think once they get going, they're pretty fierce, you know. And since we're sending all our current weaponry and ammunitions to Ukraine, we're basically going to have nothing but new stuff to shoot, you know. In other words, you know, like I saw the other day, we're sending 10,000 or 5,000 or 4,000 155 shells. I just have this vision of this guy sitting in Kentucky going like, "You want them? Sure." I got to dig. What did you?
They were shipped back. They were returned once from Saigon. So.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Well, we haven't moved these things since 1983, but you know that's fine. We'll give them to you. And you know what? That actually they probably actually once they tune them up a little bit and send them over, they're probably arm them up and send them over. They're fine. But that means buy defense stocks. I still think defense stocks are a great buy. I think the two funniest things we're seeing now in the stock market are like basically the government's making everybody get the jab, you know what I'm saying? So Pfizer and everybody's up. And then, and also they're up. And then the next thing is going to be that basically think about it. But all the time all this is done, because somebody told me the other day that like when they say they're shipping $11 billion in goods, they're not marking it up. They're basically marking it down. In other words, depreciate whatever they're doing. So we're probably clearing out. I mean, we're probably going to have to order another $100 billion in munitions, which my understanding is other than some of the missile systems, we can produce very, very quickly. Just put on an extra shift someplace down in Tennessee or up in Buffalo, outside of Buffalo, New York. And, we're turning out, 500 or 600 shells a day or whatever we're turning out. So, I mean, I'm not saying that it's a good idea that we get to replenish our stocks because of Ukraine, but the simple fact of the matter is we are replenishing our stocks. And I think the Chinese are going to be looking out there at brand new weapon systems, improved weapon systems, everything we're going to be firing at them. Shells have different generations of shells. We're going to be firing a lot of interesting stuff over Taiwan, and a lot of missiles that they will be facing brand new equipment, and God knows how old some of their stuff is. You know what I'm saying? So we'll
Right.
see.
All right, my friend, just to wind up the episode here, my friend John Kostick down in Singapore informs me there's an interesting trend with Singapore prices so high that you actually have a small contingent. If you're able to work remotely and just have to sort of show your face maybe for several days once a month, like do one week in Singapore, that you have a contingent of expats moving to Bali. Actually, that it's cheaper to be there. You just jump on a plane to do your meetings, go back. It's not a big deal. And you're paying like a quarter of what you would for the same amount of space in Singapore. So the plane ticket doesn't eat your savings. Curious what you think of that. And also, there is more news from Bali as Bloomberg reports today. This is a new thing called Bloomberg Pursuits Amenity Watch. Talking about hotels, you manage hotels, you've managed hotels in Asia and Canada, the US, I think. Here we go. In the lush mountains north of Ubud in Bali, a banyan tree resort opened in June with 16 spacious bales, I think that's how that's pronounced, or private villas that have no walls, no doors. There are room numbers but no keys. Upon arrival, each visitor is invited to stroke a kol. I think I'm pronouncing that right. A vertical hanging wooden slot drum that's used in villages. Traditional means blah, 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 blah. Welcoming guests to their naked experience. So, Mark, are people going to be starting to do business from Bali, which was sort of entirely closed for the pandemic? And are they going to be spending 5-star rates in a bug-infested jungle to stay in a room that has no mosquito nets or air conditioning?
I don't know what world people deal in. I mean, we had quiet quitting. Now we're going to have Bali quitting in Singapore. Like, just go live in Bali and do what you need to do and fly back in once a week or something like that. I don't know. I mean, look, every time I think naked, I remember I bumped into a beach in France one time that was a nudist beach. You know what I'm saying? And it was nothing but a bunch of fat guys like me praying that a hot looking younger person would show up. You know what I'm saying? It's it's basically it looks like a walrus field waiting for like a hot porpoise or something like that to show, a hot looking seal to show up. But the thing is that I see these things, and it sounds to me like a writer at Bloomberg said, hey, the PR person called me. I'm going to go out and have some fun with this. I can't believe even in Bloomberg they believe that this is going to work. It's a naked camp. It's going to basically be weird. Here's my belief about a lot of those banyan tree places and the other stuff. Everybody, the expats who go there from Singapore and other places, they just go there to get high. Because it's the place where you can. That's what you can do.
Hear a reference to that, yeah. So you're
I'm
not going
sorry
to
to say that, but I mean, I know that you can go to Bali and get stoned as a goat, and and you won't get lashes. You know what I'm saying? So you can fly down to Bali, get stoned for a week, have a good time, sit around naked if you even know you're naked, get on a plane, fly back, and then you've accomplished it. I am a believer that one of the things is, in fact, I was talking to my daughter the other day, who's in hotel school. And she was saying, look, everything is experience based. Everybody wants an experience. Everybody wants this. So, hey, why not? God bless Banyan Tree if they can throw up a shack, okay.
It looks like the fixtures are very nice, but yes, it's
I'm sure it's very nice fixtures, but as far as I'm concerned, no walls and dropping it down. You know what I'm saying? That means no air conditioning, no central plant.
Yeah.
I mean, God bless them. I bet they're charging like $400 a night too. I guarantee it. I guarantee they've got all these like tech and tech and finance guys who can't change a spark plug. I'll guarantee they got all those guys going, oh, what a great experience. I'm communing with nature. And everybody in Bali is just looking at them. All the Balinese are just looking at them going like, what a bunch of, I can't believe what we sell these people. You know what I'm saying? I mean, but I don't know. I mean, it's quite, I loved that term quiet quitting. And that's what the story, what you were talking about earlier really intrigued me. And you go to Bali and you go back, sure, you can commute to work, and I guess that's fine. I guess that works. I knew guys, but that's not a new thing. I knew guys who used to live up in southern China in really nice houses. They had really nice compounds and they liked it. They were Hong Kong guys. You know what I'm saying? They had their girlfriends up there. They had their restaurants. And all they did was when they went across the border, they went to like Welcome and they went to like, the Oliver's, the nice stores, buy stuff and then drive back across the border to their house and live in these giant homes, you know what I'm saying, up in Shenzhen. And then they'd show up in Hong Kong, Tuesdays and Wednesdays, and then they'd stay in a hotel and then go back. But yeah. I'll tell you, Kristen, I mean, what people will pay for now is just amazing. I will bet that most of the people that pay for that experience believe in the Indo-Pacific, trade agreement.
It all comes full circle.
Yeah, that's where that's what I'd love to do. Is like today we're having the Indo-Pacific meeting and we'll be staying here with no air conditioning.
It's very climate friendly.
And that's what the Indians. That's why I love the Indians with this. And this whole first thing we talked about, they're like, stop wasting my time. You know what I'm saying? This is such a waste. And they're not even that interested in going to nice hotels anymore. I'm going to get in trouble, but the Filipinos and the Thais and the Indonesians, in the old days, they just wanted to go on a trip.
Yeah, that's the whole UN General Assembly. I mean, the most busy people are, if you work in a hotel or you're a call girl, I hear they have to bring call girls up from Philly for that New York confab to the UN every
That's
year.
like in Taiwan. I always get in trouble in Taiwan because when you go to a few hotels, the Shangri-La, some of the other hotels, the Landis, where they put up these delegations that still recognize Taiwan. Every time I see their flags, I travel a lot. I know a lot of flags. Every time I see the flags, I feel like I'm walking into like the convention for Star Wars. You know what I'm saying? This is like whatever empire it was on the outskirts of the thing. You see the flags and it's like 9 different colors. There's one flag. It's freaking hilarious. Excuse my language. I think it's one of like the Marshall Islands or something like that. It's a hoot to look at that flag. It looks like, your hipster neighbor down the street, what she hangs out, you know what I'm saying, with the peace flag right next to it. It's hilarious. I'm sure one day there'll be like the LGBT flag out there, and I'll be like a buffoon and walk up and go, "So, what nation's here today?"
Did you test some hydrogen bombs in that nation back in the 50s?
What happened? But they do it. But anyway, all right. Well, look, I'll let you go. Okay.
All right. Well, that's it for this episode. We'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.